For a long time, Sarah couldn't believe what she heard on the phone. "Your brother is dead. Could you come and pick up his things?" Sarah and her brother John had been living separately for several years, each in their own house. Both left their parents' home early, and their lives seemed quite successful. That's why the news of John's sudden death shocked her to the core. They had talked recently, and he sounded so cheerful, full of plans for the future. And suddenly, death. The most amazing thing is that John left a will, and it stated that it was Sarah who should take his things. The will was signed just a day before his death, which seemed strange and disturbing to the girl. Finally, Sarah got to the apartment where her brother had been living for the last few months. The apartment was located in a small, quiet suburb, among identical houses with green lawns in front of them. It was not easy to find the right address, but the young couple living in the house made a good impression on Sarah. Friendly, calm, responsive people. As it turned out, they inherited this apartment from their grandmother, and they rented it to John. After talking to them, Sarah learned that her brother's death was unexpected for everyone. The police concluded that it was suicide. His body was found under the apartment windows. The owners of the house could not add anything, as they were on vacation at that moment. They didn't understand what could have happened. Sarah began to pack her brother's things. Clothes, laptop, phone, broken camera. All these she carefully packed in bags, while mentally returning to the last conversation with John. Time passed slowly, and the owners did not rush her. There was even a strange painting of a half-naked woman among his belongings, which she decided to take away. But as she was sorting through his things on the desk, her gaze fell on an old diary. She couldn't resist flipping through it, hoping to find at least some answer to the question of what could have led to such a tragedy. At the beginning of the diary, there were the usual entries: meetings, quarrels, conversations with friends. But then, strange notes started to appear. John wrote that one of his close friends had died suddenly, and no one could explain the cause of his death. Next, John hinted at something unknown. It was as if he had brought something into the house with his friend's belongings. Then another suicide, this time by another acquaintance. And finally, recent recordings have become chaotic and disturbing. John wrote about some kind of presence, calling it a demon, and that it was watching him. It took Sarah a long time to recover from what she had read. When she returned home late at night, she left her things in the hallway and began to prepare for bed. Thoughts of John and the strange entries in his diary did not leave her. Passing by the mirror in the hallway, she caught something strange out of the corner of her eye, a shadow. She froze and returned to the mirror, but there was only herself in the reflection. Trying to convince herself that it was fatigue and nerves, Sarah went to the bathroom. When she pulled back the curtain on the bathtub, it seemed to her that someone abruptly pulled her arm and pulled her to him. Sarah screamed, staggered back, hitting the wall. Frozen for a moment, she suddenly felt an eerie chill. With difficulty, she was able to raise her hand and jerk back the curtain. There was something there. A creature resembling a dark mass, with empty white eyes like blind lamps and a mouth studded with sharp teeth like a shark's. The creature was grinning at her and suddenly rushed at Sarah. She cringed, expecting a fatal blow, but instead muffled laughter rang out throughout the apartment. The creature disappeared as if it had never existed. Numb with fear, Sarah ran out of the bathroom and immediately called her best friend, Lisa, begging to let her stay the night. When she arrived at Lisa's, Sarah couldn't even explain what exactly had scared her so much. She literally panicked, sobbed, and couldn't connect two words. Only a sedative helped her fall asleep on the couch in the living room. The next morning, she told her friend about the diary and what had happened the day before. Lisa listened to her attentively, and to Sarah's surprise, turned out to be more superstitious than she expected. "I know a good psychic," Lisa offered. "Let me call him. He can definitely help. Maybe he can do some cleansing." Sarah thought about it, but at that moment, any answers were better than what she had been through. Lisa quickly found a psychic contact and made an appointment. The next evening, Sarah, Lisa, and the psychic arrived at John's apartment. Sarah stood in front of the door for a long time, her hands shaking. The psychic confidently knocked on the door, and easily started a conversation about what he was planning to do. Sarah couldn't believe it was real. Sarah inserted the key into the lock with trembling hands. An inner voice told her not to open the door, but she suppressed this fear and slowly turned the key. The door opened softly, and cold air hit her in the face. The apartment looked the same as the day she picked up John's things. Everything was in its place, but now there was something wrong in the room. The air became thick and oppressive, as its density had changed. The lamp on the table flickered dimly, and its light barely illuminated the far end of the room. The psychic, calm and focused, entered first. He scattered salt around the perimeter of the room, muttering under his breath some words that Sarah did not understand. Lisa remained in the hallway, nervously looking around. Her face paled, but she tried to remain calm, unlike Sarah, who could not get rid of the oppressive feeling of danger. The creature began to approach Sarah. Her legs wouldn't obey her. She stepped back, feeling the cold fingers of fear clutching her throat. The creature stretched out an arm covered with something sticky and dark, and its claws almost touched her face. Suddenly there was a loud bang and the candle went out. The room was completely dark. Sarah darted at random to the corner of the room where John's desk had been. She came across an old painting of his that she had taken away earlier. Suddenly, something warm and sticky flowed down her arms, and looking down, she saw that her fingers were covered in blood. "Lisa!" Sarah screamed, turning around, but her friend disappeared into the darkness. Footsteps rang through the room, rustling, as if someone was walking in a circle around her. Sarah could feel the cold seeping into every cell of her body, making her muscles cramp with terror. The creature reappeared, as if it had emerged from the darkness itself. It clung to Sarah, its fetid breath touching her face. "You're next," it hissed. Sarah stood there, unable to tear herself away from the place, as the creature approached. It was gloomy and rising menacingly, but there was no place for mysticism or witchcraft in her mind. Everything looked ordinary as before. It was just her brother's room, overflowing with his things, but now it became the arena for something terrible. "You should know," the creature said, "that he was mine." Sarah couldn't believe her ears. An ordinary room was filled with an eerie feeling. This couldn't be happening in real life. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. "John? Where is he?" Her voice broke, full of despair. The creature, resembling a mixture of black mist and a distorted human form, only grinned. Sarah turned abruptly to the door, but there were no clues to escape. There were no options left, and she had to look straight into the eyes of this terrible vision. "You know how it happens. You felt how he was suffering when it all started," it whispered. "With each death, he gave away a part of himself, and now you're here to inherit his torment." Images began to stir in Sarah's head. Her last conversation with her brother, his isolation, frequent mentions of depression and anxiety. Everything she saw in his diary was becoming clearer than ever. "No," she screamed, but her voice was lost in the emptiness of the room. "I can't be a part of this." She rushed to the window, hoping that the glass would help her get outside. Her strength was failing her, and before she could realize what she was doing, Sarah hit the glass, but it was solid. A feeling of hopelessness gripped her. Then, in dismay, Sarah glanced at John's things, scattered around the room. There, on his desk, she saw something that caught her attention. His old camera. It was the only item that could still connect her to normal reality. "John, if you can hear me, I'm not going to let you leave so easily," she said, picking up the camera. At that moment, she remembered how many times they had photographed nature, family events, and joyful moments together. She knew that it was his love of life and art that could help her find a way out of this situation. Sarah turned on the camera, hoping that her image could influence the situation. "We're together, John. We've always been a team," she said, looking at the camera. As if these words had caused an effect, something had changed in the room. The creature froze and then began to gradually dissolve, as if the silhouette thrown against the wall disappeared in the light. "Don't go into the dark, John," she screamed, feeling that her words penetrated to the very essence of what was happening. The creature trembled for a moment, and Sarah felt the darkness around her begin to dissipate. Suddenly, she noticed that light was beginning to enter the room, as if the morning rays of the sun were breaking through the clouds. "You're not alone," she said again. "I'm here with you." At that moment, Sarah realized that she couldn't stay alone in this chaos. She took a step forward and looked back at the camera. "John, if you can hear me, let it go. Don't let them take you," she said, all her determination filling the air. The creature screamed and eventually disintegrated into pieces that disappeared into thin air. The room filled with light, and everything that seemed dark disappeared. Sarah threw her head back in relief, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. She knew that it wasn't over yet, but this struggle also brought her relief. There was hope in her heart that John would be okay too. Hugging the camera, she left the room, while her hands were still shaking, but confidence was emerging in her soul. "We can handle it, John. I'm not leaving you," she said. Sarah met Lisa at the exit. Her face was still pale, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Both friends hugged, knowing that there is still a lot of work ahead, but they are ready to move on together. Sarah and Lisa left John's apartment, and the cold air outside enveloped them like a fresh start after a long stay in the dark. Sarah held the camera in her hands as a symbol that she was not giving up. Emotions were still bubbling in her chest, but there was no fear in them anymore. Now there was determination. In the following days, Sarah and Lisa explored every corner of John's life, studying his notes and conversations with friends. They tried to figure out exactly what had happened and how to avoid the same fate. Each meeting, each new discovery, added clarity to the picture they were trying to put together. Sarah visited the doctor John was seeing and talked to his friends. She learned about how his inner demons were gradually building up, how his anxiety and depression would not let him rest, even when he tried to seem strong. It was a revelation. She always thought John was doing well. Now she needed to learn to understand not only him, but also herself. The camera she was holding became her new tool. Sarah started blogging about her experiences, sharing stories about how important it is to be open about your feelings and problems. She led conversations with people who faced similar difficulties and offered support to those who needed it. A few months had passed, and looking back, Sarah felt that she had become stronger. Despite the loss, she was able to reconnect with John. Every time she looked at the camera, it seemed to her that he was there, supporting her. She understood that true love and support never disappear, they just change. One day, during one of the walks in the park, Sarah stopped and took a picture. She smiled, remembering all the moments they had spent together and how she and Lisa had overcome difficulties. At that moment, she realized that John was a part of her life and his memory would live on in her heart. Sarah took a step towards a new life full of hope, and she knew that despite the darkness that once surrounded her, she would never be alone. Now she has the voices of those who are with her, and she will share their stories while her own continues. The light they brought into their lives was more than just an appearance. It was their power. And every time Sarah